So now we're starting on our back block, and we just need to do, the only preparation that we need to do for our back is we're going to put in a line, our design line for our yoke, and you can see on the back of the garment here, that's this line across here. So to get this position, we're measuring down from the center back 9 centimeters, and then this, even though like it looks like it's coming down, it is actually a straight line on the garment. So so do this. You can draw this line on your block, but just do it in pencil so it can be erased later. And don't use your tracing wheel on the block either. You shouldn't really need to for this. So I'm coming down from the center back 9 centimeters, and then putting the lines of my ruler along the center back fold there. I'm just taking that over towards the armhole. So is that pretty easy to see, Libby?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. So we've got this as our reference line for our yoke. So we're just going to do the bottom section of our back. So because we know this yoke is going to be a separate pattern piece altogether, we're just going to start from that line around down the side seam, across the bottom, and up to that point on the center back. So just make sure you transfer your notches onto the pattern. So our waist notch here and our back balance notches, back armhole balance notches. And then we're just going to join this up. So rule a line across there.
Looks really crooked because of the angle that I'm shooting on, but it is actually a straight line that's square at centre back. Yeah, that's better? That shows it better, yeah. So it is a straight line.
Tricky camera.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to put in our bottom, so this shape here, and you can see if I turn it to the side that the front we've dropped it 5 centimeters, but the back we've dropped it 7.5, because it tends to be when you're wearing a shirt, if you've got it tucked in, that it tends to always pull out more across the back than it does in the front, which is why you need like a longer length to tuck in at the back. So for this back, for the front, like I said, we went down 5 centimeters. For the back, we're going to come down 7.5 centimeters. And then we're going to take this across and draw in this here. It's weird on the PowerPoint, it looks like it looks like the same as the front, but it is actually, a fair bit longer. So anyway, so keep it flat for a couple of centimeters at the side seam, and this will have a much more dramatic curve going into the back there. If you wanted to, I've done that quite sketchily, that line. So if you had a French curve, you could you could draw on top of that to make it a definite line. But remember too that that's the stitch line, so we'll neaten that up as we add the seam allowance or the hem allowance to the back block.
And the other thing to remember with that, it looks quite short in length, but remember this pattern piece is on the fold, so when that is repeated on the other side,
good point.
It ends up looking in proportion on the shirt.
So what we've just drawn is that section.
Yeah.
So when you see it as as the whole way across, it really is quite a decent wide piece going across your bottom. So we're doing our waist dart now, so you can see here. Not sure how clear they are to see, Libby, but yeah, we have waist darts in the back, and that takes the care of a little bit of this fullness through the back here. It certainly doesn't make it fitted, but it makes it so that it sort of skims the body a little bit more, rather than like it's not as if we're fitting it in like that, which you could do, but this is a classic shirt. The fit is a little more subtle than something really tight on the body. So we've had our our notch on the side seam. We've just marked that on the block there and drawn across at right angles. Something you could do, like I put that there, and then I drew across from there. Another thing you could do is just move this to the centre back, and use that point there as your reference point, and then connect the two.
So this is our waistline, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that was our waist notch on the side seam, and we squared it across to the centre back. Now, maybe if I do it this way, so we need to find halfway across there. So halfway between the side seam and the centre back. And we're going to draw a line down 14 centimetres.
Make sure it's square, so get the lines on your ruler lined up.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got this line going across here so that all these lines are parallel. So we've come down 14 from the waist, down 14, and from the waist up 14 as well. Now we're going to make our waist dart a 2 centimetre dart, so coming out 1 centimetre on either side there. And then we connect those lines. Okay, so that's our back darts. We've just joined up the points. Now we need to add drill holes, so for to guide us when we're sewing this dart, because remember that when you're sewing the dart you'll actually only just have 3 drill holes to follow. So the bottom drill hole will be 1 centimetre back from the end, so a little cross with a circle around it. The top one is 1 centimetre back from the end, again with a little circle. And then because this is only 1 centimetre from here to here and 1 from here to here, rather than having like 0.5, because usually going on the vertical darts I would have a drill hole 0.5 centimetre back from the stitch line at the waist there. But rather than having like one there and one there 1 centimetre apart, in this instance, you could just put one in the middle with a circle around it, knowing in this instance that you've got to sew 1 centimetre past each side. So think of that, that centre line there is the fold line. So the drill holes sit on the fold line, and then you measure from that point to the stitch when you're sewing the angle there. A bit more water.
Yeah, so if the darts are a lot bigger, that's when you use the other method of coming in.
Exactly. If this in total was a 3 centimetre dart, then I would definitely have, if it was like this size, like I'd have 0.5 back from the waist and 0.5 here, because it's easier to follow, on a big dart like that. If you've got, if you just had one dart in the middle, measuring 1.5 centimetres from either side of that, it's a little bit harder. So, of course, this is our back, the back of the shirt, and there's no centre back seam here, which means that we have to put this centre back on the fold. So indicate this really clearly on your pattern.
This is like international pattern making language, which you don't. Language isn't an issue. As soon as you see that grain line with the arrows coming into that line, you know that that's on the fold. Yeah,
and so this is a fold of fabric, and that's what they call it in commercial patterns. This is referred to as fold of fabric, and it's the thing when you're laying up fabric, you actually fold the fabric across, and then this part of your pattern sits on that fold of fabric. But you also need to write that on there. So you can write centre back or CB if you're just making the pattern for yourself. And then I'm writing place on fold here, but sometimes I literally just write fold, there.
And you often just see CBF, centre back fold as well.
Yeah.
It's quite common to see.
So, but yes, and the other thing too, now we're going to add seam allowances onto the pattern, is not to add a seam allowance down the centre back. And I suppose if you didn't put it on the fold and then you added a seam allowance, at least you'd have a seam allowance to sew the pieces back together again to fix up the mistake you just made. So but yes, you don't want a seam down the centre back, so don't add a seam allowance. Because the thing is too, if you added a seam allowance and then you thought, hold on, it's the back, I have to place that on the fold, then you automatically, like make the back 2 centimetres wider, so it won't fit onto the yoke then. So for our seam allowances here, we're adding the yoke seam allowance, 1 centimetre, 1 centimetre for the armhole, the side seam, and 12 millimetres for the hem, which is the same, as we've done on these pieces here. And keep in mind, remember that whatever things are sewing together, make sure they have the same seam allowances. So, like this side seam sewing onto this side seam, so obviously both seam allowances have to be 1 centimetre. The sleeve, is going to sew into the armhole, so they'll both need to be 1 centimetre seam allowances. So just keep a track. And it's a little bit trickier on a shirt because you do have several seam allowances to play with. But generally it's always the neck and the collar pieces that are 6 mil. All construction seam allowances are 1 centimetre, and then the hem is, in this instance our hem is 12 millimetres. So that's because we've got a little double roll, but on another garment, it might be, 4 centimetres or 3 centimetres or something. So yes, around this hem, try and be a bit more definite with your curves. And then we just need to transfer our notches onto the raw edge in the armhole, onto the side seam here. And one thing that there are 2 ways of doing this. One is to indicate, because remember the yoke is going to be sewn onto this line here, and it would be good to have a notch at the centre back, because our yoke piece is going to go all the way across when it's cut out in fabric. So in this instance, like I would sometimes put a little diagonal notch coming out, because you can't have a straight notch following the centre back because that's a cut edge. So you can do that also, or maybe like if you don't put a notch there, maybe that's something the machinist might do when she's actually coming to sew that edge. She might just fold the fabric in half and and put a little snip at the centre back there, and do the same thing on the yoke.